Hello again, you're joining us on India Tonight here on ET Now. Now, the World Trade Organization, the WTO, they're meeting in Geneva. India is taking a rather strong stand over there for all its interests in various aspects of trade and commerce. After the G33 meeting, the Union Minister Piyush Goyal, the Union Minister for Commerce and Industry, has hit out at the WTO over the response the world had to the pandemic. In what is turning out to be a rather strongly worded statement, Piyush Goyal has said that the body, that WTO, needs to hang its head in shame for how they've dealt with COVID and the global lockdowns. At that summit, India is batting for rich countries to waive off patents of COVID vaccines and has sought more help for poor nations from the developed West. Food security is also a big flashpoint this time around, especially where India is concerned, with the rising food product prices that have left the world reeling. The Minister, Piyush Goyal, has highlighted the importance of fisheries for global food security. And with the WTO's plans to curb subsidies, fishermen who have converged at Geneva, they're demanding a rollback of the proposal itself. India is also backing a proposal to penalize rich nations who provide non-targeted subsidies for fishing in international waters. The developed nations give these subsidies, as we understand, for fuel to the large fishing vessels, and that puts smaller fishermen at a loss. Piyush Goyal says that it is time for rich nations to assume responsibility for the depleting stocks of fish in the world. India is also backing a proposal to get a 25-year policy for deep-sea fishing for developing nations. In fact, he's made India's stance rather clear that the world needs to find a permanent solution for food security, and the WTO needs to do more, much more. Let's listen in to what Piyush Goyal had to say at a media conference that took place in Geneva ahead of the WTO meetings.
Always negotiations are sought to become a win-win for both sides. And when you are trying to create a win-win solution to very intricate problems where you are building a consensus amongst nearly 200 nations, obviously one has to be sensitive to each other, one has to be practical. However, that cannot be at the cost of our farmers at any cost. That can never be at the cost of the people of India and India's self-interest.
All right, so those are the words and the kind of clear stance, and a strong stance at that, coming in at the WTO in Geneva. To understand the issues that are at hand and what India can negotiate for, what it can push for, let's speak to Pradeep Mehta. He's the Secretary General of Cuts International, which is, of course, a think tank, and Mr. Mehta is Secretary General there. Mr. Mehta, very good evening. Thanks for making the time for speaking to us here at ET Now. As we just heard, and like I was telling our viewers, India seems to be taking this strong stand. Let's talk about fisheries first for small Indian fishermen. And they've been demonstrating in Geneva. They're trying to protect their rights against these developed countries, giving out non-targeted subsidies, and that has them at a loss, which is something that they're protesting against. That stance, is that likely to hold as an example of what India is trying to do? Let's start about the fisheries, because that seems top of mind with all these small Indian fishermen who have been protesting over there.
Yeah, I agree with our minister about the stand that he's taken on both fisheries as well as the pandemic. Indeed, it is something that we can hang our head in shame, for the simple reason that the stance of the rich countries in the context of a trading system which is highly wounded, I mean, WTO itself is in a difficult situation, requires everybody to be pragmatic and to move ahead in a manner that you can take everybody along. And as the minister said, they have to be considered. They have to be considered towards and be sensitive towards other sensitivities, as it were, and fisheries, or even the permanent stockholding, as we've been talking since Bali ministerial, is something which needs to be resolved before we move ahead. Of course, there is a pending agenda as well, a long old agenda which has not moved anywhere at all. But at the same time, what we do require is the fact that it is an iniquitous world. There's no doubt about that. And therefore, what is happening in the context of the fishing subsidies is certainly very iniquitous, in the sense that here you're looking at the same thing what we've argued in the context of climate change as well, the luxury emissions versus the utility emissions. Somebody pointed out that our buffaloes and cows cause a lot of methane emission. But the fact is, these are all utility emissions. So the same kind of logic one has to apply to the fact is that our fishermen are subsistence fishermen, and they usually these are people who've been in fishing for generations and use this as a livelihood issue, and livelihoods is something which the WTO is committed to uphold as part of its preamble as well. And therefore, one has to remind people about the basic principles of the WTO, which would be harmed, other than the fact is that there are various other issues which lead to this kind of situation where the minister has very rightly pointed out in terms of the pandemic.
And one of the other issues, Mr. Mehta, is about the vaccines and the world's response to the need as far as less developed countries are concerned in terms of being able to provide poor people with the vaccines that they require to fight the pandemic. They say the WTO, India's stance is that the WTO has not risen to the occasion. Do you support that kind of perspective?
No, I would disagree with that. I would disagree with that for the simple reason that vaccines is not a trade issue as such, not a trade policy issue. The issue was the waiver of intellectual property rights, which doesn't make sense. And this is what is something which we've argued that you've been wasting a lot of time and energy on something which is not required. For example, the biggest vaccine manufacturing is happening in India today. And this is without any IPR problems. This is something and our vaccine manufacturers have been supplying to the world at a low cost. So it's not such an issue that we should have made. We made it as a kind of as a kind of lodestar, looking for a better word, as something of a big
Mr.
issue.
Mehta, isn't it true that some of these countries are trying to protect the profits of pharma companies like India's stance is?
That is an age-old thing. The fact is that TRIPS should not have been there in the WTO. It's something which we argued even at that time in 1990s. That how do you bring in a trade restrictive agreement in a trade liberalizing rubric? But the fact is that it is landed up there, and there is certainly a big interest of both the pharmaceutical as well as agrochemicals industry in Europe and in US. But we have also started now getting into the IPR game. Even many of our institutions are discovering the value of IPR protection. Our film industry, for example, is highly obliged to ensure that their copy IPRs are protected. Otherwise, the kind of duplication which takes of our films is huge. And we have to continue to look at things which concern us. If there is a deal, how do we make the best out of it? Is what we have to look at.
Yes,
Sorry?
But when it comes to the vaccine issue and perhaps on fisheries, which you said you agreed with, there is a perception that India is being slightly obstructionist, maybe slightly more than slightly. Is that a view that you would accept? Because at a multilateral level, at a bilateral level, India is pushing for regional trade even. There are lots of FTAs being done. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, the IPEF, is something that India is a party to. So I'm just wondering whether there is a difference in stance where India is concerned, what they're doing at WTO and what it's trying to do by way of pushing the agenda for trade.
No, I agree with you. I mean, quite often we've seen in our policy circles that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. I can give you several instances. And the fact is, yes, we are opening up to trade liberalization through bilateral deals. At the same time, we are being obstructionist at the WTO. I mean, we've been obstructionist at the WTO for long. And this is something which we've been arguing against. That, look, you have to take care. We are a responsible economy. We are a big economy with big ambitions to become a $10 trillion economy by 2030. That is not how it behoves us to have, be obstructionist all the time. Now, the fact is that we have opened up on bilateral fronts, bilateral trade deals, etc. How do we go ahead is something which we yet have to see. It is still to sort of the jury's still out. We had bilateral trade deals even earlier with Indo-ASEAN, etc., where we felt that we did not get what we should have got.
Sure.
But the fact is that even our industry was ignorant about many of these things. But I'll not get into
Yes.
those details.
Yes.
The fact is that we are being obstructionist at the WTO, which is not fair. We are not even a member of the various plurilateral
Yes.
discussions which are going on
And that's
which
exactly,
are of concern
yes,
to us.
exactly. And that is being discussed over there, how much India is able to achieve by way of, trade deals that would actually help India in the long term. That is something that one needs to watch out for as an outcome of India's delegation and the work that they do at the WTO in Geneva this time. Mr. Mehta, it's a pleasure talking to you, and perhaps we can have a longer discussion on many of the pending issues in the future. But thanks very much for joining us this evening.